You are standing on the walls of Suiyang. It's January 757. Below you, 130,000 enemy soldiers surround the city like a tide of iron and flesh. Behind you, 6,800 men. That's it. By every military principle you know, your position is already lost. But what nobody outside these walls understands yet is that mathematics stops mattering when hunger becomes the dominant force. If you've made it to this point in the video, hit subscribe. There's more uncomfortable history ahead, and I promise it only gets darker from here. The Tang Dynasty was having a golden age problem. When empires get too successful, too rich, too confident, they make a specific kind of mistake. They concentrate overwhelming military power in the hands of men who aren't quite loyal enough. An Lushan was that man. By 755, he commanded 3 military commissions: Pinglu, Fanyang, and Heidong. This gave him control over northeast China and more than 150,000 battle-hardened troops. These were veterans who'd fought nomadic raiders on the frontier, men who knew how to kill efficiently and move fast. And Lushan himself was fascinating in all the wrong ways. Born to a Sogdian father and Turkic mother, he'd risen from the borderlands through sheer capability. Charismatic, multilingual, tactically brilliant. Emperor Xuanzong didn't just trust him, he loved him. The imperial consort Yang Guifei adopted An Lushan as her son in a ceremonial ritual. He lived in a mansion decorated with sandalwood in the capital, hosted lavish banquets. The emperor gave him everything. That trust was about to cost 30 million lives. When An Lushan rebelled in December 755, he moved with terrifying speed. City after city fell or surrendered. Governors fled. Magistrates switched sides. Within weeks, he'd captured Luoyang, the eastern capital. By mid-756, his rebel Yan army controlled most of northern China, including both imperial capitals and the majority of the empire's population. The Tang Dynasty, the most powerful empire on earth, was collapsing like a house built on sand. Southern China, the Yangtze Basin, was the real prize. That's where the food came from, the wealth, the resources, everything the rebellion needed to survive long-term. Between the Yan army and that fertile territory sat a single obstacle, a mid-sized city called Suiyang, positioned right on the Grand Canal between Kaifeng and Xuzhou. Take Suiyang, and the South falls. Hold Suiyang, and the rebellion starves. The city's administrator, Xu Yuan, knew he couldn't hold alone. He sent for help to neighboring garrisons. One man answered, Zhang Xun, a former county magistrate and volunteer commander who'd already held off a rebel siege at Yangzhou the previous year. Zhang knew exactly what was at stake. If Suiyang fell, the Tang Dynasty ended. He gathered 3,000 men and marched straight into what everyone knew was a death trap. They were facing something unprecedented. When Yin Ziqi arrived to besiege Suiyang in late January 757, he brought an army estimated at 130,000 men. The defenders? Zhang Xun's 3,000 combined with Xu Yuan's garrison, maybe 6,800 total. That's a 19-to-1 disadvantage. These aren't odds. This is execution logistics. Zhang Xun and Xu Yuan divided responsibilities cleanly. Xu focused on supply management and repairing damage after each assault. Zhang handled tactics and combat. It was a practical arrangement born from necessity. What neither man could have predicted was how long they'd need to make it work. The first weeks showed everyone what they were dealing with. The Yan army launched massive assaults daily. Wave after wave of soldiers hitting the walls with siege ladders, trying to find weak points, testing the defenders' stamina. The walls of Suiyang weren't particularly impressive standard provincial fortifications, not imperial capital defenses. Under normal circumstances, 130,000 troops should breach them in days. But Zhang Xun had a gift for psychological warfare that went beyond conventional military thinking. He understood that numbers mean nothing if you can destroy enemy morale. Raw force matters less than the enemy's belief in their ability to apply it. Break that belief, and suddenly mathematics stops being predictive. His troops started playing war drums at night. Loud, aggressive, the sound of imminent attack. The Yan forces, conditioned by previous battles, stood at full alert, armor on, weapons ready. Nothing happened. The next night, same thing. Drums. Alert. Nothing. Then again. And again. The pattern created exhaustion. After several nights, Yan's soldiers stopped putting on armor when they heard the drums. They stayed in their tents and tried to sleep. That's when Zhang Xun's forces actually attacked. 50 cavalry per general. A dozen generals total. They hit the Yan camp in a coordinated midnight raid and slaughtered 5,000 men before withdrawing back into the city. But Zhang Xun wasn't done. He had a specific problem. He needed to hurt Yin Ziqi, the Yan commander. Not just defeat him, actually injure or kill him, break the command structure. Except he had no idea what Yin Ziqi looked like. This was 757. No photographs, no detailed descriptions reaching the besieged city. Yin would be surrounded by thousands of soldiers, wearing identical armor. So Zhang turned to psychology again. He ordered his archers to shoot weeds at a small group of enemy soldiers. Not arrows, weeds. Bundled grass. The soldiers, seeing projectiles flying at them and landing harmlessly, were thrilled. They assumed the defenders had run out of arrows. They ran straight to their commander to report this critical intelligence. Zhang Xun watched to see where they ran, noted the exact position in the Yan formation, then ordered Nan Jiyun, his best archer, to put an arrow through that spot. The arrow struck Yin Ziqi in his left eye. The Yan army descended into chaos instantly. Their commander was screaming, half blind, being carried from the field. After 16 days of siege and ambush tactics, the Yan forces had lost 20,000 men, almost 15% of their force. Yin Ziqi ordered a retreat to regroup. 2 months later, he returned with 20,000 fresh troops. The second siege began in early summer. The defenders knew this time was different. This wasn't about quick victory anymore. Yin Ziqi had learned. He was going to grind them down, starve them out, wait until the walls could be held by corpses. Xu Yuan had prepared well. He'd stored enough food for a year of siege. But there was a problem nobody had anticipated. Another Tang commander, Li Ju, had forced Xu to share supplies with 2 other commanderies before the siege began. The 1-year stockpile became a 6-month stockpile. In a siege that would last 10 months. By summer, the math became unavoidable. Daily combat, daily casualties, no resupply. The enemy wasn't going anywhere. Zhang Xun sent his officer Nan Jiyun to break through enemy lines and request reinforcements from nearby Tang garrisons. Nan made it out, got to the commanders, begged for help. They sent 3,000 troops. Only 1,000 made it through the Yan siege lines alive, along with 200 enemy soldiers who defected after hearing Zhang Xun's appeals about the righteous Tang cause. Total reinforcement? 1,200 men. It extended the timeline slightly. Not enough. By July, 4 months before the city would finally fall, the food ran out. Completely. The Tang historical records are precise about what happened next, because this is where the siege crossed from military history into moral nightmare. First, they ate the horses. All of them. Thousands of cavalry horses that could have been used for a breakout attempt or mounted raids. Butchered and distributed. When those ran out, they ate dogs. Then rats. Then they boiled leather equipment for whatever nutrition could be extracted. They ate tree bark, tea leaves, paper. Soldiers chewed grass and roots. Disease followed hunger. Men who weren't dying from starvation died from the illnesses that accompany malnutrition. The garrison that started with nearly 7,000 men was down to 1,600 by August. Still, they held. Zhang Xun rotated his troops, maintained defensive positions, launched occasional sorties to keep Yan morale damaged. His men were skeletons with weapons. Then Zhang Xun made the decision that would define his legacy and spark controversy for the next 1,000 years. He called his soldiers together, took his own concubine, the woman he loved, and executed her in front of them, had her body butchered and the meat distributed to his wavering troops. He told them, "You've worked to protect this city with complete loyalty, despite endless hunger. I can't cut flesh from my own body to feed you. How can I keep this woman while you starve?" The soldiers wept. They refused to eat. Zhang Xun ordered them to eat. Then Xu Yuan killed his household servants and did the same. The Tang Chronicles are clear about this because there was no way to hide it afterward. The cannibalism wasn't desperate individuals acting in secret. It was organized, methodical, a logistical operation carried out by garrison commanders to preserve combat effectiveness. Women first, then elderly men, then children. The new Book of Tang records the number as 20,000 to 30,000 civilians consumed. The exact figure will never be known. What's certain is that by the time Suiyang fell in November 757, only 400 people remained alive inside the city. From a population of tens of thousands, the Tang soldiers fought until they physically couldn't draw bowstrings, until their arms no longer had the strength to lift weapons, until standing required more energy than their bodies could produce. On November 24, 757, the Yan army finally scaled the walls. There was no one left capable of stopping them. Zhang Xun, Xu Yuan, and their remaining officers were captured. Yin Ziqi, the general who'd spent 10 months battering against this city, actually wanted to spare Zhang Xun. He recognized military genius when he saw it, but his subordinates argued that letting Zhang live would inspire Tang resistance everywhere. They killed him along with 36 of his officers. Before his execution, Zhang Xun said something that survives in the historical record. "We're out of strength and can't defend the fortress anymore. Though we failed the emperor in life, we hope to keep killing enemies after death." Yin Ziqi asked him about a rumor. "I heard that every time you fought, your eyes were ripped open and your teeth cracked from rage. Is that true?" The chronicles don't record Zhang's answer. Maybe there wasn't one. What answer do you give when you've turned yourself into something monstrous to serve a cause you believed was righteous? But here's what the Yan army learned after Suiyang fell. The victory was hollow. They'd lost over 60,000 troops in the siege. That's nearly half their force. The time they'd spent trapped at Suiyang gave the Tang Dynasty exactly what it needed. Time to regroup, to gather allies, to build counterattack forces. By late 757, Tang armies with Uyghur cavalry support were already pushing the rebels back. The strategic was very clear. If the Yan forces had taken Suiyang even 1 year earlier, the Tang Dynasty would have ended in 757. Instead, the rebellion collapsed. An Lushan was assassinated by his own son in January 757, the same month the siege began. His son An Qingshu was killed by another general, Shi Siming, who took over the rebellion. Shi Siming was killed by his own son. The rebellion ate itself while Tang forces methodically recaptured territory. By 763, it was over. The Tang Dynasty survived, barely. The war had killed anywhere from 13 to 36 million people, depending on which demographic studies you trust. That's roughly 5% of Earth's total population at the time. In proportional terms, this makes it one of the deadliest wars in human history. And at the center of that carnage sat a question nobody could answer cleanly. Was Zhang Xun a hero or a monster? When the Tang court wanted to posthumously honor him, the debate exploded. Court officials argued both sides with genuine passion. Some maintained that it would have been better for Zhang to evacuate Suiyang than eat the people entrusted to his care, that no military objective justifies cannibalism, that the act violated every principle of humanity and governance. Others, led by Zhang's friend Li Han, argued 3 points in his defense. First, that human flesh was eaten only as a desperate last resort when other Tang forces failed to provide relief. Second, that his defense kept the rebels out of the Huai River Valley and southern territories, preventing Yan conquest and contributing directly to their eventual defeat. His military accomplishment was so significant that even if he'd intended cannibalism from the start, the merit and fault would cancel each other out. Third, that Zhang remained loyal to the emperor unto death, and honoring him would encourage others to similar faithfulness. Emperor Suzong sided with the defenders. Zhang Xun was added to the list of loyal martyrs and rewarded with posthumous offices. Shrines were built to honor him and Su Yuan, first in Suiyang, later at the Lingyan Pavilion in Chang'an, alongside the most respected officials in Tang history. A historian named Graf later suggested that Zhang Xun was declared a loyalist icon, not in spite of his cannibalism, but because of it. The extremity of what he did demonstrated the absoluteness of his loyalty. This logic makes a certain kind of sense if you don't think about it too hard. If you do think about it, you're left with questions that don't have comfortable answers. What do you do when every choice available is monstrous? Zhang Xun could surrender, which meant his men would be executed and the Tang Dynasty would likely fall, leading to potentially millions more deaths. He could evacuate, abandoning the strategic position, and again, probably dooming the dynasty. He could let everyone starve to death, which achieves nothing except a slower path to the same defeat. Or he could do what he did. The Tang Chronicles note that people knew their death was close, and nobody rebelled. There's debate about whether this means the civilians accepted their fate or whether it means terror prevented resistance. Both interpretations are probably true simultaneously. The defenders ate approximately 30,000 civilians to keep 400 soldiers alive, long enough to hold a city for 10 months. The tactical math worked, the moral math never will. After the war ended and the Tang Dynasty stabilized, poets wrote about Suiyang. Artists painted it, scholars debated it for centuries. Zhang Xun became a door god in Chinese temples, a protector deity whose image wards off evil. The same man who organized systematic cannibalism to preserve combat effectiveness. That transformation tells you something about how empires process trauma. They turn horror into mythology. They take acts that should be cautionary tales and polish them into heroic narratives. Because the alternative, admitting that sometimes defending civilization requires becoming the monster you're fighting, breaks the social contract too severely to acknowledge. The physical evidence left behind was stark. When Yan soldiers entered Suiyang, they found a city that barely qualified as one anymore. Walls damaged by months of assault, buildings collapsed from bombardment, the streets silent except for a few hundred starving survivors who lacked the strength to move. Historical accounts mention the smell, the pervasive stench of death and decay that made even hardened soldiers recoil. The Grand Canal running through Suiyang continued to operate after the war ended. Trade resumed. The city was rebuilt. Within decades, new residents who'd never experienced the siege lived normal lives there. That's how history works in practice. The sites of unimaginable horror become addresses where people raise children and run shops and complain about taxes. But the question lingers. Not the tactical question, historians mostly agree Zhang Xun's defense succeeded strategically. The deeper question, what does it mean when the preservation of civilization requires its temporary abandonment? When loyalty demands betraying everything, loyalty is supposed to protect? Zhang Xun spoke to his troops regularly during the siege. He appealed to the Yan soldiers, trying to convert them with words about righteousness and the just Tang cause. Some actually defected. Men who heard him speak and decided they'd rather die defending Suiyang than conquer it. That's charisma. That's leadership. That same leader organized the systematic consumption of civilians. Both facts exist in the same person. History doesn't give us the luxury of choosing only the comfortable truths. The An Lushan Rebellion fundamentally changed the Tang Dynasty. The empire survived but never recovered its earlier strength. Regional military governors gained power that the central government couldn't fully reclaim. The cosmopolitan Golden Age ended. China turned more inward. The western regions were lost. The Silk Road trade networks that had made the Tang Dynasty wealthy and culturally vibrant slowly deteriorated. You can draw a direct line from Zhang Xun's desperate defense in 757 to the eventual collapse of the Tang Dynasty in 907. His actions saved the empire in the short term, but the war he helped prolong so devastated China that the eventual outcome, fragmentation, and collapse became inevitable anyway, just delayed by 150 years. This is the paradox of extreme loyalty. It preserves the thing it loves just long enough to watch it die slowly instead of quickly. Zhang Xun bought time for the Tang Dynasty, time measured in decades and millions of lives. Whether that was worth the price paid at Suiyang is a calculation each person has to make individually. What's certain is that the soldiers who died there, the civilians who were consumed, and the men who survived all knew they were participating in something beyond ordinary warfare. The Tang Chronicles mention soldiers weeping when ordered to eat human flesh. They note that many didn't want to, but they did it anyway because obedience to authority and loyalty to the empire overrode personal morality. That obedience is what military hierarchies depend on. It's what allows armies to function. It's it's also what enables atrocities. The same psychological mechanism that creates brave defenders creates participants in organized horror. There's no clean way to separate those outcomes. Modern military ethicists debate Suiyang as a case study in extreme circumstances. The usual rules don't apply when facing extinction-level defeat. But what rules do apply? If the normal ethical framework suspends under sufficient pressure, then ethics aren't really ethics, they're just preferences that evaporate when tested. If the framework remains regardless of circumstances, then Zhang Xun was a war criminal who should be condemned rather than honored. The Tang Dynasty chose honoring him. Pragmatically, this makes sense. You need people willing to defend cities against overwhelming odds. You need soldiers who won't surrender when surrender seems rational. The way you get that is by honoring the ones who don't surrender, regardless of what they had to do to keep fighting. It's cold calculation dressed as nobility. But remember, the civilians didn't choose this. They were trapped in a city that became an abattoir because strategic positioning made their home militarily significant. They became involuntary martyrs for a cause that probably meant very little to them personally. Most people don't care which emperor sits on a distant throne. They care about their immediate survival and the safety of their families. Zhang Xun turned those families into rations. For the empire. For the cause. For 10 more months of resistance that mathematics said was impossible, the Yan forces lost 60,000 men at Suiyang. That's sons, fathers, brothers. Men who joined the rebellion for their own reasons, maybe believing An Lushan's cause was righteous, maybe just following orders, maybe seeking advancement. They died in waves against walls, defended by soldiers who were eating the city's population to maintain strength for the next assault. Neither side was populated by monsters. That's what makes this story unbearable. Zhang Xun was described as tall, imposing, literary, loyal, brilliant. A man who wept with his soldiers and inspired devotion. Yin Ziqi was competent enough to be entrusted with major campaigns and respected enough that his subordinates feared Zhang Xun might inspire mutiny. Normal men doing monstrous things because their circumstances demanded it. The Ziji Tongjian, the comprehensive Chinese historical chronicle, records Zhang Xun's life and death in detail because his story was considered essential to understanding the An Lushan Rebellion. Not as an outlier, as a central example of what the war demanded from everyone involved. Imagine being a civilian in Suiyang in October 757. You've watched the siege for 9 months. You've eaten everything imaginable. You're skeletal, your family is dead or dying. The garrison is down to a few hundred soldiers who can barely stand. Everyone knows the city will fall within weeks, maybe days. And then you notice the soldiers looking at you differently, calculating. You understand that your body has become military logistics. You have no weapons, no strength to run, no possibility of escape through 130,000 enemy troops. You're already dead. The only question is whether your death serves a strategic purpose. That realization, that moment of understanding might be worse than the physical death that follows. The knowledge that you've been reduced to a resource to be managed by people making decisions you have no input on. That your autonomy, your humanity, your entire existence has been simplified to calories that can extend combat effectiveness by a few more days. The Tang Chronicles don't dwell on these individual experiences. They give us numbers and strategic outcomes. But behind every number was a person who experienced their final moments knowing exactly what was happening and why. Some might have accepted it. Others resisted, though resistance meant nothing. The Chronicles mention that people knew their death was close, but don't elaborate on what that knowledge felt like. We're 1,300 years removed from these events. The people involved are dust. Suiyang is a modern Chinese city with no visible traces of what happened there in 757. Tourism sites don't mention the cannibalism. It's not part of the local narrative. The siege exists primarily in academic texts and historical debates about military ethics. But the question remains alive. What would you do? Not theoretically, actually. If you were Zhang Xun, commanding a city that must not fall, watching your soldiers weaken from starvation, knowing that surrender means not just your death but potentially millions more as the empire collapses. If you were a civilian in that city, would you volunteer? Would you accept the logic that your death extends resistance? There's no right answer because the situation itself is wrong. The circumstances that create these choices are the problem, not the choices themselves. But circumstances don't care about objections. They create the choice space and force selection. The physical mechanics of the siege are clear. The strategic implications are clear. The ethical questions remain unresolved and probably unresolvable. The Siege of Suiyang was a success tactically and a catastrophic failure systemically. The fact that it needed to happen at all meant something had gone profoundly wrong. An Lushan shouldn't have had 3 military commissions. The regional governors should have supported each other. The court should have sent relief forces. The strategic situation should never have reached the point where 6,800 men in a medium-sized city became the last line of defense for an entire empire. But it did reach that point. And when it did, Zhang Xun made his choice. He chose the empire over the civilians under his protection. He chose abstract loyalty over concrete humanity. History validated that choice by honoring him, which means history teaches us that when the stakes are high enough, individual lives become acceptable collateral damage. That's a disturbing lesson. It's also probably accurate. Every nation that's ever existed has operated on some version of that principle. The specifics vary: who counts as acceptable collateral, how high the stakes need to be, how the decision gets made. But the underlying logic is consistent. The collective matters more than the individual when the collective survival is at stake. Zhang Xun just made that logic visible in the most horrifying way possible. He didn't hide behind drone strikes or statistics or euphemisms like collateral damage. He looked his soldiers in the eye and ordered them to eat people. He made the abstract concrete. That's why we're still talking about it in 1,300 years later. If you've made it this far, you're someone who values the uncomfortable truths hiding in history. Subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more forgotten stories to uncover together. Thanks for watching.